The sheriff's deputy stood beside the concrete barriers that now blocked Pine Ridge Circle, reading from his clipboard while a line of cars stretched behind him like a funeral procession. Inside those cars, 83 families who'd spent the morning grocery shopping, visiting relatives, or running errands, were discovering they couldn't get home. "Sorry, folks, but this is private property now," Deputy Rodriguez announced through a megaphone. "The property owner has restricted access pending resolution of ongoing legal disputes." I watched from my porch as HOA President Patricia Caldwell climbed out of her BMW, her face twisted with the kind of rage that comes from finally understanding you've been outplayed. "Frank Morrison?" she screamed across the crowd. "You can't lock us out of our own neighborhood." I walked down my driveway to the gate I'd installed that morning. The same gate that controlled access to the only road leading into Pine Brook Heights, a road that ran across my family's land for 3/4 of a mile before reaching their precious subdivision. "Actually, Patricia, I can do whatever I want with my private road. Just like you did with my bridge." Her eyes widened as the full scope of her mistake became clear. For 6 months, Patricia had used every legal trick in the book to stop me from building a simple footbridge across the creek that separated my property from the hiking trail. She'd filed injunctions, organized protests, and convinced the entire HOA that my bridge was somehow a threat to their community values. What Patricia never bothered to research was how her subdivision gained access to the outside world. Because if she had, she would have discovered that the Morrison family owned the road easement that made Pine Brook Heights possible. But let me start from the beginning, when Patricia Caldwell thought she could bully a fourth-generation landowner off his ancestral property. 8 months ago, my biggest concern was whether to replace the rotting wooden bridge that crossed Willow Creek on the eastern edge of my 847-acre property. The old bridge had been built by my grandfather in 1954, connecting our main ranch to the hiking trails that wound through the state forest. My wife Sarah and I used those trails every morning for our 5-mile walk, just like we had for 32 years of marriage. At 74, I wasn't as spry as I once was, but those daily hikes kept me strong enough to still help with cattle roundups and fence repairs. The problem was that grandfather's bridge was finally giving up. The support beams had developed a concerning sag, and the handrails wobbled dangerously whenever the creek ran high. Sarah refused to cross it anymore after nearly falling through a rotted plank in May. "Frank, either we fix that bridge or we find a new walking route," she'd said, examining the damage after our abbreviated hike. Building a new bridge seemed simple enough. The creek was only 12 feet wide at the crossing point, and modern materials would create a safer, more durable structure. I contacted county planning to file the necessary permits. That's when I first encountered Patricia Caldwell. Patricia was 60-something, reed thin, and carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd spent decades correcting other people's mistakes. She'd moved to Pine Brook Heights from San Francisco after her husband's tech company went public, trading California's chaos for what she called rural sophistication. "Mr. Morrison," she'd said, appearing at my front door with a thick folder and the expression of a prosecutor presenting evidence, "I understand you're planning construction that could impact our community." "Just replacing an old bridge, Mrs. Caldwell. Same location, same purpose. I've reviewed your permit application, and I have serious concerns about the environmental impact, aesthetic considerations, and precedent this sets for future development." I stared at her. "It's a footbridge. 12 feet long, 3 feet wide. My family's been crossing this creek for 70 years. Yes, but Pine Brook Heights wasn't here 70 years ago. We have different standards now." That should have been my first warning. Patricia Caldwell didn't just want to control her subdivision, she wanted to control everything she could see from her subdivision. Patricia's opposition started subtly. She filed a formal objection to my bridge permit, citing concerns about increased foot traffic and disruption to wildlife corridors. Never mind that I was the only person who used the trail, or that wildlife had been crossing at that exact spot since before humans arrived. The County Planning Commission scheduled a hearing for my controversial bridge application. When I arrived at the government building that Tuesday morning, I was surprised to find 12 Pinebrook Heights residents in attendance, all clutching copies of Patricia's environmental impact report. Mr. Morrison's proposed bridge represents a significant escalation of human activity in a sensitive ecosystem, Patricia read from her prepared statement. The increased foot traffic will disturb nesting birds, alter wildlife migration patterns, and potentially introduce invasive species to the state forest. I listened to 20 minutes of testimony about how my morning walks constituted an environmental disaster waiting to happen. Patricia had somehow convinced her neighbors that my 70-year-old hiking routine was equivalent to building a shopping mall in Yellowstone. When my turn came to speak, I kept it simple. Commissioners, I'm replacing a bridge that's been in the same location since 1954. The new structure will be smaller, safer, and built with environmentally friendly materials. My family has been using this trail for 4 generations without disturbing so much as a squirrel's nest. Commissioner Janet Hayes, who'd known my family since childhood, seemed skeptical of Patricia's claims. Mrs. Caldwell, are you suggesting that Mr. Morrison's current bridge is causing environmental damage? I'm suggesting that any expansion of human activity in sensitive areas requires careful review. But he's not expanding activity. He's replacing existing infrastructure. Patricia's prepared response revealed the true depth of her research. Commissioner Hayes, the original bridge was built without environmental review or proper permits. Mr. Morrison's current usage may have been grandfathered in, but any new construction should meet modern standards. She was right about the permits. Grandfather had built his bridge the same way ranchers did everything in 1954, by identifying a problem and fixing it without asking permission from people who'd never set foot on his land. The commission voted 3-2 to approve my bridge permit, but only after requiring an environmental impact study, wildlife survey, and historical preservation review. Patricia had turned a simple bridge replacement into a bureaucratic nightmare that would cost me months of delays and thousands of dollars in consulting fees. As residents filed out of the hearing room, Patricia approached me with a smile that belonged on a rattlesnake. Nothing personal, Mr. Morrison. We simply believe in responsible development. I understand completely, Mrs. Caldwell. What I understood was that Patricia Caldwell had just declared war on the wrong family. The environmental impact study took 4 months and cost $23,000. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a wildlife biologist, not the senator, spent weeks documenting every bird, mammal, insect, and plant species within a quarter-mile radius of my proposed bridge site. Her final report was 127 pages of scientific analysis that concluded exactly what any rancher could have told you for free. My bridge wouldn't hurt anything. The proposed footbridge will have negligible impact on local wildlife populations, Dr. Warren wrote. Current human activity levels are minimal and well within acceptable parameters for ecosystem sustainability. But Patricia wasn't finished. She hired her own environmental consultant, Dr. Marcus Webb, who produced a competing study that somehow reached the opposite conclusion. According to Dr. Webb's analysis, my bridge represented a significant intrusion into pristine habitat that could cascade into ecosystem collapse. The dueling reports landed on the Planning Commission's desk just as Patricia escalated to her next phase, media manipulation. Patricia's media strategy was sophisticated and ruthless. She'd convinced the local newspaper that my bridge represented a larger conflict between development and conservation, painting herself as an environmental activist protecting pristine wilderness from encroachment. Rancher battles environmentalists over controversial bridge. Read the headline in the Riverside County News. The article quoted Patricia extensively about the need to protect our last remaining wild spaces from unnecessary development. Mr. Morrison wants to industrialize one of the county's most beautiful natural areas, Patricia told reporter Michelle Garcia. His bridge is just the beginning. Once you allow one structure, where does it end? The article included photos of the creek crossing that made my modest hiking trail look like the gateway to environmental destruction. Patricia had somehow made my morning walks sound like a threat to the entire ecosystem. But Patricia made one critical error in her media campaign. She described my property as pristine wilderness and undeveloped natural habitat. Anyone who'd lived in the county for more than 5 minutes knew that the Morrison Ranch was working agricultural land, not untouched wilderness. My family had been farming and ranching this property since before Patricia was born. The newspaper's comment section became a battleground between Patricia's supporters and longtime residents who knew the real history. Old-timers shared stories about buying beef from my father, hunting on Morrison land with permission, and watching 4 generations of our family practice responsible land stewardship. Patricia Caldwell moved here 6 months ago and thinks she can rewrite a century of local history, wrote Bill Thompson, whose family had farmed the adjacent property for 60 years. The Morrisons have done more for conservation in this county than 100 environmental consultants. But the comment that really caught my attention came from someone named County Planner Official. Maybe Mrs. Caldwell should research how her subdivision gained access to public roads before lecturing others about land use. That comment sparked an idea that would change everything. That evening, I drove to the county courthouse for the first time in years. The records department was open late on Thursdays, and I wanted to research something that comment had made me remember. Helen Martinez, the chief records clerk, had been filing deeds and surveys since before computers existed. She remembered when my father had sold the 400-acre tract that became Pinebrook Heights. Frank Morrison, haven't seen you in ages. What brings you by? Helen, I need to look at the original sale documents for the land that became Pinebrook Heights. Specifically, I want to see the easement agreements. Helen pulled up the file on her computer, then walked to the physical archives for the supporting documents. What she showed me made my pulse quicken. Here's your father's deed from 1987, she said, spreading out the survey map. He sold 400 acres to Mountain View Development, but look at this notation. She pointed to a handwritten addition in the margin, access easement granted for single-family residential use only, subject to agricultural preservation requirements. What does that mean exactly? Your father sold the land, but retained control over road access. The easement allows residential traffic, but the Morrison family can revoke it if the land use changes or if the easement rights are violated. I studied the map more carefully. The only road into Pinebrook Heights ran for 3/4 of a mile across my property before reaching the subdivision. My father had granted access rights in 1987, but he'd been smart enough to include protections. Helen, what would constitute a violation of easement rights? Oh, lots of things. Commercial use of residential property, environmental damage affecting the agricultural operation, harassment of the easement grantor. She trailed off as she realized where my questions were leading. Frank, you're not thinking of revoking their road access? I'm thinking of reviewing whether their current usage complies with the original easement agreement. Helen pulled out another document. You should see this too, the homeowner association agreement from when the subdivision was built. Look at Section 12. Section 12 was a paragraph about road maintenance responsibilities. The HOA was required to maintain the access road and coordinate with the Morrison Ranch on any changes that might affect agricultural operations. Have they been maintaining the road? Helen asked. I thought about the potholes that had been growing deeper every winter, the lack of snow removal that forced me to plow the road myself, and the complete absence of communication from the HOA about their responsibilities. Not exactly. Frank, easement violations can be grounds for immediate revocation, especially if the violations interfere with the grantor's property rights. I thanked Helen and drove home slowly, my mind racing with possibilities. Patricia Caldwell had spent 6 months trying to stop my bridge construction by claiming environmental authority over my land use. She had no idea that I had actual authority over her community's existence. Before I could research the easement situation further, Patricia escalated to direct legal action. Her environmental law firm filed for a temporary restraining order against my bridge construction, claiming that proceeding without resolution of the environmental disputes would cause irreparable harm to sensitive habitat. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday in federal court. Patricia had managed to make my backyard footbridge into a federal case. "Frank, this is getting expensive," David Kim warned during our prep meeting. "Fighting a federal injunction could cost $50,000 even if we win." "What are they claiming exactly?" "That your bridge violates the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, and something called the National Environmental Policy Act. They've identified 3 supposedly endangered species that use the creek crossing." I reviewed Patricia's evidence. She'd found an obscure subspecies of creek minnow, a migratory bird that might nest in the area, and a type of moss that allegedly required specific moisture conditions. "David, I have been walking across this creek for 40 years. My father walked it for 50 years before me. If these species were really endangered, wouldn't someone have noticed by now?" Logic isn't always relevant in environmental law, Frank. Judges tend to err on the side of caution when endangered species are involved. The federal hearing was a disaster. Patricia's environmental lawyer, Kevin Blackwood, presented a compelling case about protecting sensitive habitat from human encroachment. He'd brought Dr. Webb back as an expert witness, along with 2 additional scientists who testified about the fragility of creek ecosystems. Judge Catherine Chen listened patiently to 3 hours of testimony about endangered minnows and migratory bird patterns. When my turn came to present a defense, I felt like David facing Goliath with a broken slingshot. "Your Honor, the Morrison family has been crossing this creek since 1923. We've been responsible stewards of this land longer than most of the species Dr. Webb claims to be protecting." "Mr. Morrison," Judge Chen replied, "historical usage doesn't necessarily justify environmental impact. The court must consider current scientific understanding of ecosystem protection." She granted Patricia's temporary restraining order. For the next 6 months, I was legally prohibited from building a bridge on my own property while Patricia's team prepared for a full environmental lawsuit that could drag on for years. That night, Sarah found me sitting on the back porch, staring at the creek crossing where my grandfather's bridge was slowly collapsing into the water. "Frank, maybe we should just find a different walking route." "Sarah, this isn't about the bridge anymore. Patricia Caldwell is trying to steal our family's right to use our own land. So what are you going to do?" I pulled out the easement documents Helen had copied for me. "I'm going to remind Mrs. Caldwell that 2 can play the property rights game." The next morning, I spent 6 hours at the courthouse, researching every detail of the road easement that connected Pine Brook Heights to the outside world. What I discovered was even better than I'd hoped. The original easement from 1987 was specific in its limitations. My father had granted access for single-family residential traffic only, with strict prohibitions on commercial use, heavy vehicles, and any activity that might interfere with ranch operations. But Patricia's HOA had violated those restrictions dozens of times over the years. The easement file included maintenance records showing that delivery trucks, moving vans, and construction vehicles used the road daily. A landscape company had been running commercial equipment across my property every week for 2 years. The HOA had even allowed a concrete company to use the road for a major driveway renovation project. Each violation was photographed, dated, and documented by my ranch hands who'd been curious about the increasing traffic volume. "Carlos," I called my foreman, "do you remember when that cement truck got stuck in the mud last spring?" "Yes, boss. Took 3 hours to pull him out. Made it a hell of a mess." "Did you happen to take pictures?" Carlos grinned. My nephew Manuel got video on his phone. The truck driver was furious. "I need copies of all that documentation. Every commercial vehicle, every overweight load, every violation of the residential only easement." By the end of the week, I had evidence of 127 easement violations dating back 3 years. Patricia's subdivision had been systematically abusing their road access, while simultaneously trying to restrict my property rights. The irony was perfect. She'd spent months arguing that I couldn't build a bridge on my own land because of environmental regulations. Meanwhile, her community had been violating our property agreement for years. I started with a friendly conversation. On Saturday morning, I knocked on Patricia's door carrying a manila folder and wearing my most diplomatic smile. "Patricia, I wanted to discuss the road easement situation before any misunderstandings develop." She answered the door in workout clothes, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "What road easement?" "The access agreement that allows your community to reach the main highway. I've been reviewing the original terms, and there are some compliance issues we should address." Patricia's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. "What kind of compliance issues?" I opened the folder and showed her photos of commercial vehicles using the access road. "The easement is restricted to residential traffic only. Commercial use requires separate agreements and additional fees. Those are just delivery trucks and service vehicles. Every neighborhood has them." "True, but most neighborhoods don't access the public highway through private property. Your road crosses my ranch for 3/4 of a mile before reaching county-maintained pavement." Patricia studied the photos more carefully. "Are you suggesting we can't have deliveries?" "I'm suggesting that commercial use of my private road requires proper authorization and compensation. Just like you suggested that my bridge requires environmental review and community input." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What do you want?" "Nothing unreasonable. A commercial use agreement for legitimate business traffic, moderate fees to cover road maintenance costs, and recognition that property rights work both ways." "And if we refuse?" "Then commercial vehicles will need to find alternate routes to Pine Brook Heights." Patricia's eyes narrowed as she realized the implications. There were no alternate routes. The Morrison Ranch Road was the only access to her subdivision. "This is extortion. This is property management, Patricia. The same principle you've been applying to my bridge construction." Patricia called an emergency HOA meeting for Sunday evening. The community center was packed with worried residents who'd received Patricia's urgent notice about threats to community access. "Folks, we're facing an unprecedented attack on our basic rights," Patricia began, her voice carrying the authority of a wartime leader. "Frank Morrison is attempting to hold our entire community hostage over his illegal bridge construction." She had prepared a PowerPoint presentation that painted me as a vindictive neighbor using property law to terrorize innocent families. According to Patricia's narrative, I was demanding thousands of dollars in protection money just so residents could receive mail and grocery deliveries. "This is about more than road access," she continued. "Morrison is trying to establish precedent that rural landowners can control suburban development through economic intimidation." The presentation included legal citations, cost analyses, and a timeline of events that made my bridge replacement sound like part of a larger conspiracy against modern civilization. Tom Rodriguez, one of the few residents who'd remained neutral in our dispute, raised his hand. Patricia, what exactly is Morrison demanding? Commercial use fees, road maintenance costs, and veto power over any business activity that uses our access road. How much in fees? Patricia consulted her notes. He's asking for $500 monthly per household for road maintenance, plus $50 per commercial vehicle that uses the easement. The room erupted in angry voices. Residents calculated monthly costs, questioned the legality of my demands, and demanded action from their HOA leadership. But Patricia had made a critical error in her presentation. She'd focused entirely on the costs of my proposal without mentioning the alternative. Mrs. Caldwell, called out Janet Morrison, no relation. What happens if we refuse Morrison's terms? We fight this in court and establish clear precedent that private road owners can't extort money from residential communities. But what happens to our access while the court case proceeds? Patricia's pause was just long enough to let doubt creep into the room. Morrison wouldn't dare cut off access to an entire subdivision. The county would intervene. She was wrong about that too. Patricia's law firm filed their motion in federal court on Wednesday morning, seeking an emergency injunction against any interference with Pine Brook Heights road access. They argued that my easement revocation would constitute collective punishment for individual property disputes and violated residents' constitutional rights to reasonable access. The hearing was scheduled for Friday afternoon before Judge Michael Torres, a no-nonsense jurist who'd been handling property disputes for 20 years. Patricia arrived with 3 lawyers, 2 expert witnesses, and a reporter from the regional newspaper. She'd turned our neighborhood disagreement into a test case for property rights across the county. Your Honor, lead attorney Kevin Blackwood argued, Mr. Morrison is using his road ownership to coerce an entire community into abandoning legitimate environmental concerns about his construction project. How so? He's demanding payment for road access that has been free for 35 years, solely in retaliation for the community's objections to his bridge construction. Judge Torres reviewed the easement documentation. Mr. Blackwood, this appears to be a private road crossing Mr. Morrison's property. What gives your clients the right to free access? The original easement agreement, Your Honor. Mr. Morrison's father granted permanent access rights when the subdivision was developed. Permanent residential access rights, I interjected. The easement specifically prohibits commercial use without separate agreements. Judge Torres examined the commercial vehicle documentation I'd submitted. Mr. Morrison, you're claiming that delivery trucks and service vehicles constitute violations of the residential easement? Your Honor, the easement allows access for residents and their guests. Commercial enterprises using my private road to conduct business in the subdivision require separate authorization. Patricia's lawyer tried to recover. Your Honor, these are essential services: mail delivery, trash collection, emergency vehicles. Emergency vehicles have access under county emergency services agreements, I replied. Mail delivery and trash collection are commercial services that benefit from using my road to reach paying customers. Judge Torres was clearly intrigued by the legal complexity. Mr. Morrison, what are you proposing? Reasonable commercial use agreements for legitimate business traffic, moderate fees to maintain the road they're using, and recognition that private property rights apply even when they're inconvenient for suburban development. And if they refuse, then commercial vehicles will need to find alternate routes. Are there alternate routes? No, Your Honor. Pine Brook Heights is only accessible through my property. The courtroom went quiet as everyone processed the implications. Patricia had spent months fighting my bridge, while completely ignoring her community's dependence on my road. Judge Torres called a recess to review the documentation more thoroughly. During the court recess, I made a phone call that would change everything. Carlos, it's Frank. I need you to install the gate system we discussed. You sure about this, boss? Patricia Caldwell just spent 3 hours in federal court arguing that property owners can't control access to their own land. I think she needs a practical demonstration of how property rights actually work. By the time Judge Torres reconvened court, my ranch crew had installed an electronic gate system at the point where the access road entered my property. The gate was connected to an intercom system that would allow me to control which vehicles could enter Pinebrook Heights. Judge Torres denied Patricia's request for an emergency injunction. The court finds that Mr. Morrison has legitimate property rights regarding commercial use of his private road, he ruled. The original easement clearly restricts usage to residential traffic, and the plaintiffs have failed to demonstrate that enforcement of those restrictions violates any constitutional rights. Patricia's face went white as she realized what had just happened. However, Judge Torres continued, the court strongly encourages both parties to negotiate a reasonable accommodation that serves everyone's interests. As we left the courthouse, Patricia cornered me in the parking lot. Frank, you can't seriously be planning to control access to our community. Patricia, you can't seriously be planning to control construction on my property. But here we are. This is different. You're threatening people's homes, their ability to receive services, and you're threatening my family's ability to use land we've owned for a century. Which threat is more reasonable? She had no answer for that. Monday morning, I implemented the new access protocol. The electronic gate required verification for all commercial vehicles delivery companies needed to register in advance, provide insurance documentation, and pay a modest processing fee. The gate system was completely reasonable and thoroughly legal. Residential traffic flowed freely. Emergency vehicles had automatic access codes. Even scheduled deliveries could proceed normally with 24 hours advance notice. But Patricia had trained her community to expect conflict, and they interpreted my reasonable security measures as the beginning of a siege. By 10 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly. Mr. Morrison, this is Janet Morrison from Pinebrook Heights. The UPS truck can't deliver my medication because your gate is locked. Did UPS register for commercial access? Register? Nobody told us about registration. The information was mailed to every household last Friday. UPS can call the number on the gate to complete emergency registration, or they can register online for future deliveries. This is ridiculous. We shouldn't need permission to receive packages. Ma'am, you need permission to drive commercial vehicles across my private property. The gate system just formalizes a process that should have been in place for 30 years. Similar calls came every hour. FedEx drivers confused by the registration requirement. Grocery delivery services unable to access the community. Contractors arriving for scheduled work only to find themselves locked out. Each caller received the same patient explanation: register in advance, follow the commercial vehicle protocols, and respect the property rights that made their community possible. By Wednesday, most delivery companies had completed the registration process and were operating normally. But Patricia was building toward her next offensive. Thursday morning, I had Carlos conduct a thorough inspection of the access road's condition. 35 years of heavy traffic had taken a toll that the HOA was contractually obligated to address. Boss, this road is in terrible shape, Carlos reported. The asphalt is cracking everywhere, the drainage ditches are clogged, and there are potholes deep enough to swallow a small car. What would it cost to bring it up to county standards? Maybe $150,000 for a proper resurface job. More if we have to rebuild the foundation. I called a road construction company for an official estimate, then sent the assessment to Patricia's HOA board with a 30-day deadline for repairs. The response came back within hours. Mr. Morrison, the Pinebrook Heights HOA disputes your assessment of road conditions and denies responsibility for maintenance costs on your private property. I'd expected that response. Patricia was still thinking like this was a negotiation rather than a legal obligation. I called the road construction company back. Miguel, this is Frank Morrison. I'd like to schedule that road repair project we discussed. You want us to fix the whole thing? Just the part that crosses my property. About 3/4 of a mile. What about access during construction? That's the interesting part, Miguel. We'll need to close the road completely for about 2 weeks while you rebuild the foundation. Miguel whistled softly. That's going to block access to the whole subdivision. I know. But private property owners have the right to maintain their roads properly, even if it temporarily inconveniences people who've been using them for free. I scheduled the road construction to begin the following Monday. On Friday, I sent another certified letter to every Pinebrook Heights resident explaining that their access road would be completely closed for 2 weeks due to overdue maintenance. Residents requiring access during construction should make alternate arrangements, the letter concluded. Emergency vehicle access will be maintained through coordination county services. The problem was, there were no alternate arrangements. Pinebrook Heights was surrounded by my ranch on 3 sides and state forest on the 4th. The Morrison Ranch Road was the only way in or out. Monday morning arrived with the sound of diesel engines and the scrape of heavy machinery. Miguel's crew set up their equipment exactly where the access road entered my property, creating an impenetrable barrier between Pinebrook Heights and the outside world. I watched from my kitchen window as Patricia organized an impromptu protest at the construction site. She'd rallied about 20 residents to demand immediate access, holding signs that read "Open our road" and "Stop the harassment." Miguel, a patient man who dealt with angry property owners before, tried to explain the situation. "Ma'am, this is private property, and we have a legal construction contract. You'll need to speak with Mr. Morrison about access during the work period." "We demand to speak with him now." I walked down to the gate carrying a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, like I was settling in for a long conversation. "Good morning, Patricia. Lovely day for road construction." "Frank Morrison, you can't imprison an entire community?" "I'm not imprisoning anyone. I'm maintaining my private road, which is my legal right and obligation as a property owner. People have jobs, medical appointments, children who need to get to school. I understand the inconvenience, and I sympathize. But this road hasn't been properly maintained in over 20 years. The HOA ignored their contractual obligations, so now I'm handling it myself." Tom Rodriguez, one of the more reasonable residents, stepped forward. "Frank, how long will this really take?" "Miguel estimates 2 weeks for a complete rebuild. Could be longer if they find more foundation problems. Is there any way to maintain limited access?" I pretended to consider this. "Well, I suppose I could allow essential traffic if the HOA was willing to acknowledge their maintenance obligations and work out a proper use agreement." Patricia exploded. "We're not paying you protection money to use a public road." "This isn't a public road, Patricia. It never was. It's a private road crossing my ranch, and your community has been using it for free under a 35-year-old gentleman's agreement. The easement covers residential access only. Your HOA has violated those terms hundreds of times by allowing commercial traffic without authorization." The crowd was getting increasingly agitated, but their anger was shifting from me to Patricia. Several residents were clearly wondering why their HOA president had started a fight with the person who controlled their only access to civilization. Why Tuesday, the road closure had attracted attention from local news outlets. The story of an entire subdivision trapped by their feuding neighbor was too good for reporters to ignore. Channel 7's evening news led with road rage. Rancher cuts off subdivision access over bridge dispute. The piece included aerial footage of the construction blockade, interviews with stranded residents, and Patricia's increasingly desperate attempts to frame herself as a victim. "This is rural terrorism," Patricia told reporter Amanda Santos. "Frank Morrison is holding 83 families hostage because we objected to his environmentally destructive bridge project." The reporter also interviewed several residents who weren't part of Patricia's inner circle. "Look, I just want to get to work and come home," said Mike Chen, a software engineer who commuted to the city. "I don't understand why our HOA president picked a fight with the guy who controls our road. We moved here for peace and quiet," added Sarah Williams, a nurse at the county hospital. "Instead, we got dragged into some ridiculous property war that's making everyone miserable." But the most damaging interview came from Tom Rodriguez, who'd done his own research into the HOA's management. "Patricia Caldwell has been president for 3 years, and our road maintenance fund has a balance of $47, Tom revealed. "She spent $80,000 on landscaping and community events, but couldn't budget for basic infrastructure." That interview was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Residents who'd been trapped in their homes for 2 days, while Patricia grandstanded on television, were already angry. Learning that their HOA had ignored road maintenance while funding Patricia's pet projects pushed them over the edge. Wednesday morning, I received a call from Tom Rodriguez. "Frank, there's going to be a special HOA meeting tonight to discuss Patricia's leadership. Thought you should know. Appreciate the heads up, Tom. There's something else. About half the community wants to work out a deal with you directly, bypass the HOA entirely." "What kind of deal?" "Pay the road maintenance costs, formalize the commercial access agreements, and get this mess resolved before it destroys everyone's property values." That evening, angry voices carried across the distance from the Pinebrook Heights Community Center to my front porch. Patricia was fighting for her political life while her community discovered exactly how much damage one person's ego could cause. Thursday morning brought a delegation to my front door. Tom Rodriguez led a group of 12 residents who'd broken ranks with Patricia's leadership and wanted to negotiate directly. "Frank, we need to end this," Tom said. "Most of us had nothing to do with the bridge dispute, and we're tired of being collateral damage in Patricia's war." I invited them into my living room, noting that none of Patricia's inner circle was present. "What are you proposing?" Sarah Williams spoke up. "We accept that we've been using your road without proper compensation. We want to formalize the arrangement and pay our fair share of maintenance costs." The HOA already rejected that approach. "The HOA is about to vote Patricia out of office," Mike Chen revealed. Last night's meeting was intense. She lost a vote of no confidence, 31-12. Who's taking over? Interim president will be Tom Rodriguez, assuming you're willing to work with new leadership. I looked around the group. These were reasonable people who'd been caught in the middle of Patricia's crusade. They deserved a fair resolution. "Here's what I'm willing to offer," I began. "Immediate reopening of road access for residents and emergency vehicles. Commercial access returns to normal with a simple registration system. Road maintenance costs split proportionally among all households that use the easement.